Snowflakes drifted gently from the sky like silent pieces of paper, dancing in the wind before resting on the dark, icy streets of Southbridge, a small town tucked far from the noise of cities. The wind howled down narrow alleyways like a ghost, looking for shelter, rattling trash bins and shaking old wooden signs. Streetlights flickered above cracked sidewalks, casting pale yellow halos that couldn't quite chase away the night's cold. Inside the Midnight Spoon, a small old-fashioned diner with faded red booths and a creaky doorbell, Delilah Carter wiped down the last table of the night. She was a tall black woman in her late 20s, with smooth brown skin, curly black hair pulled back under a blue bandana, and soft eyes that often looked tired, yet kind. The diner's jukebox still hummed quietly in the corner, playing a slow jazz tune from decades ago. The scent of leftover pot roast and coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the warm smell of the kitchen's fading heat. Delilah worked the night shift 6 days a week. She didn't complain. She never had. Life had been hard ever since her mama died of pneumonia, and her grandma had gotten too sick to care for herself. Delilah lived in a rented room above an old laundromat and sent nearly every dollar home to cover Grandma Pearl's insulin and the heating bill. She was used to being invisible. Customers came and went. Some were kind, most were rushed, and some didn't look her in the eye. Delilah served them all the same, with a gentle smile and hands that moved with quiet grace. Her boss, Mr. Haver, didn't talk much to her except when something was wrong, which was often dot as the last customer shuffled out and the front door closed with a heavy thud. Delilah exhaled slowly. She leaned on the counter, massaging her wrist. The heat was off again in the kitchen. She would have to wash dishes with freezing water, but just as she reached for her apron string, a sound froze her. A knock, not from the front door. From the back. It was almost midnight. No one ever used the back entrance. Only deliveries, and those didn't come in the dead of winter. Delilah frowned. She hesitated, then slowly walked toward the back. The metal door groaned as she opened it, letting in a sharp gust of wind. At first she didn't see anyone, but then, to her right, in the corner by the dumpster, she saw them, 2 small children, huddled together under an old blanket. One was a boy, maybe 9 or 10, with skinny arms wrapped around a smaller girl who looked 6 or 7. Their faces were pale with cold, cheeks red from the wind. The girl's eyes were half closed. The boy's lips were trembling as he whispered something to her, holding her tightly like a human heater. Delilah stepped outside and felt the snow crunch beneath her boots. The boy saw her and flinched, shielding the girl with his arms like he expected to be chased away. "It's all right," Delilah said softly, kneeling down. "You don't need to be scared." The boy didn't move. "We're sorry," he said, voice cracking. "We didn't steal nothing. We just needed a place to sit. We'll leave, I swear it." Delilah's heart ached. She took off her coat and wrapped it around the girl, whose teeth were chattering so hard her whole body shook. "Are you hungry?" she asked gently. The boy hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the back kitchen window where warm light still glowed. Then he gave a small nod. Without a word, Delilah rose and went back inside. She gathered a clean plate, filled it with hot chicken stew from the pot she had planned to throw out. She added a roll, a slice of pie, and even a little carton of milk. Left from the breakfast service, she found an old flannel blanket from the lost and found in the staff closet. Then she stepped back outside. The kids hadn't moved. Delilah knelt and handed the plate to the boy. He took it carefully, like it might vanish. He helped his sister sit up, holding the spoon to her lips first before taking a bite himself. Their eyes closed as the warmth hit their stomachs. Delilah sat with them for a few minutes in the snow, watching quietly. "What's your name?" she asked softly. The boy wiped his mouth. "Isaiah, and she's Naya. Where are your parents?" Isaiah looked down. "They died," he said. "Car crash. 2 years ago. We've been moving around since, group homes, shelters, then we ran away. They tried to separate us." Delilah felt a deep ache in her chest. She remembered being 7, clutching her mother's hand while waiting for food stamps in a frozen line, watching her cry quietly when the clerk spoke rudely. "No child should carry this kind of burden." "Well," she said after a pause, "this alley ain't where you belong. You finish your food. I'll be back." Inside the diner, Delilah worked quickly. She filled a box with leftover sandwiches, cookies, and bottles of water. She tucked in napkins, a small flashlight from the drawer, and 2 pairs of clean socks, donated by a local church last week. She paused before going back out. Mr. Haver would fire her if he found out, but the thought of those children, alone in the dark, erased the hesitation. She stepped outside, gave the box to Isaiah, and helped them both move behind the dumpster where it was slightly warmer. She gave Naya a gentle hug and whispered, "You'll be okay. I'll see you again." "Why?" Isaiah asked, his voice quiet. "Why are you helping us?" Delilah looked at him, her breath fogging in the air. "Because someone once helped me, and because kindness is free, baby. It's the only thing that is." That night, as she lay in bed under thin covers, Delilah stared at the cracked ceiling and prayed quietly. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, but she knew one thing. She had to keep them safe, even if it cost her everything. Delilah Carter woke before the sun. The first thing she did was check the plastic shopping bag hidden under her bed inside it. A few crumpled dollar bills and coins, tips from the previous night. She took a deep breath, then pulled on her worn work boots and wrapped herself in her long gray coat. As the sky lightened to a dull gray, she stepped outside and walked briskly down the street, her boots crunching the thin layer of frost that coated the sidewalk. Her fingers were stiff with cold, but her mind was alive with concern. But they still there? She turned the corner behind the Midnight Spoon Diner and approached the alley slowly. Her heart thud. A movement. A rustle. Then she saw them. Isaiah sat against the brick wall with his knees tucked under his chin, his sister Nia curled against his side like a kitten. They were both wrapped in the blanket Delilah had given them the night before. The food box was nearly empty, only a few crumbs remained. Isaiah looked up, blinking through the early morning light. Delilah smiled softly. "Morning, baby. Did you sleep okay?" Nia stirred, then opened her eyes. She nodded sleepily, and Delilah knelt beside her. "I brought you something." She reached into a pocket and pulled out 2 small breakfast muffins wrapped in wax paper, still warm from the oven, and some juice. Isaiah's eyes lit up. "Thank you." Delilah hesitated. "Listen, you can't stay here all day. If someone sees you... We'll find somewhere," Isaiah said quickly, trying to sound strong. Delilah looked at the skinny boy, his 2 large shoes and brave little face. She thought about what she could do. She whispered, "Come back tonight, after closing. I'll bring more food." He nodded. That night, Delilah finished her shift as always, wiping tables and scrubbing pans. Mr. Haver grunted about closing early because of the snowstorm. Delilah nodded politely but said nothing. When he left, she moved quickly from the walk-in fridge. She packed 2 servings of hot stew into styrofoam containers. She added fresh bread, apples, and even a slice of cherry pie she had set aside in secret. Into a small bag she tucked plastic spoons, napkins, and 2 knitted hats donated to the diner by a church group during Thanksgiving. Then she slipped out the back door. They were waiting. Isaiah stood up when he saw her. Nia ran toward her arms. Outstretched, Delilah crouched and hugged her close. "Hey, sweetheart." She handed Isaiah the food and helped them settle behind the dumpster, under the overhang where snow couldn't fall. She stayed a while that night, telling them stories, soft ones, about the stars, about her grandma's garden, about what home used to feel like. And then, as Nia began to drift off, she hummed a low, warm lullaby her mama once sang. "Go to sleep, little baby. The world's still turning, and your dreams are waiting... The girl's eyelids fluttered. Isaiah leaned back, real smile on his face for the first time, and under the soft glow of the security light, Delilah stayed until both children fell asleep. This became their secret rhythm. Every night for weeks, Delilah, the waitress no one noticed, would serve tables by day and deliver meals in the alley by night. She used her tip money to buy extra food. She collected warm socks and mittens from the charity box near the train station. She even managed to sneak an old storybook down to the alley one night, reading aloud by flashlight in her small apartment. She began sewing together a patch blanket for them from torn pillowcases and discarded fabric pieces. She wasn't good at sewing, but it didn't matter. It was made with love, and each stitch carried hope. Sometimes, she brought Isaiah a notebook and a pencil, encouraging him to draw or write. His handwriting was shaky, but his imagination ran wild. He once drew a picture of the 3 of them flying in a helicopter. "You drew me," Delilah laughed, pointing to the woman in the center. "Yeah," Isaiah said shyly. "That's you. You saved us." Delilah looked at the sketch long after they fell asleep. It stirred something deep in her, something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. But the world isn't kind to quiet kindness. One night after she handed them dinner, she turned and gasped. Mr. Havar stood at the back door, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Delilah?" He looked down at the children. His lip curled. "Feeding strays from my kitchen." "They're not strays," she said, standing tall. "They're children with no home," he snapped. "That's not your problem. That's the government's problem. You want to be a hero. Do it on your own time, not with my food. You're stealing." Delilah's face flushed. "I paid for it, with my tips." Haver leaned in. "Not good enough. You're fired." The words hit her like a slap. "Get out now." Delilah looked at Isaiah and Nia. The boy was already trembling. She nodded slowly. "Okay." Then she took off her apron, laid it gently on the ground, and walked into the night. That night, she sat in her apartment with the lights off. The heater sputtered. Her hands were numb. She had no job, no savings, a sick grandmother waiting in a care facility. And now she'd lost everything for feeding 2 children. She wept, but she didn't regret it. She thought about Nia's sleepy giggles, Isaiah's drawings, the way they looked at her like she mattered. That night she wrote in a torn notebook, "Tonight, I was fired, but I gave 2 children a warm meal. I think that means I won." She didn't know it yet, but that notebook would someday be displayed in a museum named after her. And the helicopter Isaiah once drew. It wasn't a dream, it was a prophecy. The next morning, Delilah Carter stood outside the diner, coat zipped to her neck, hands trembling not from the cold, but from the aftershock of what had happened. The Midnight Spoon loomed behind her like an old memory, familiar but already fading. Its neon sign still buzzed against the pale gray sky, blinking diner in flickers that looked more tired than inviting. She had worked there for 7 years, never missed a shift, never came in late, and yet one moment of compassion had erased all of that. Fired. The word echoed inside her like an alarm that wouldn't stop. She looked down at the cardboard box in her arms, her apron, name tag, and a small glass angel that had hung above her locker. That angel had belonged to her, Mama. Now it sat tucked between her cracked coffee mug and the notebook Isaiah had drawn in. For a moment, she just stood there letting the wind sting her face. Behind her, the kitchen door slammed shut. She didn't look back. By noon, the word had spread, not just that Delilah had been fired, but that she had been caught stealing food. That was the version Mr. Haver told the other workers, and to the other businesses on the block. She was feeding street kids behind the restaurant, he said with a sneer. Out of my inventory, can't run a charity off my books. He didn't mention that she had paid for it. He didn't mention the winter or the fact that the street kids were orphans, and he definitely didn't mention her kindness. By the time Delilah reached Mama Clara's dry cleaning to ask about part-time work, she was already branded. Sorry, Delilah, Mama Clara said, her voice low. It's not personal, but folks are talking, you know how it is. Business can't afford no scandal. Delilah nodded, hiding her hurt with a practiced smile. I understand, but she didn't. Not really. She spent the afternoon walking street after street, store after store. Everywhere she went, she got the same answer. Sorry, not hiring your Delilah. Right? Oh, ... Yeah, we heard ... Yeah, we heard it. One small cafe. The young manager didn't even look up from his clipboard. Is this about the job? He asked flatly. Because, if you're the one from the Spoon, we already got our staff. She stepped outside, heart sinking, lips trembling. The snow was falling again. Her boots had begun to leak. She thought of her grandmother, Pearl, in the small care facility across town, her hands swollen from arthritis, her breath shallow and strained. Delilah had to pay for her medicine this week, but now, how? She pressed her forehead to a brick wall in the alley. Trying not to cry, she had done the right thing. She knew she had done the right thing, so why did it feel like the world was punishing her for it? That night, she returned to the alley behind the diner. It was after closing. The lights were off. The dumpster glistened with frost, and they were there. Isaiah and Nia, just as she had feared. Still waiting, still hungry, still trusting. Delilah approached slowly. Isaiah stood and immediately rushed toward her. I'm sorry, he said, breathless. I didn't mean to get you in trouble. I didn't know he was watching. Delilah knelt and held his shoulders. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault, but you got fired. She nodded. Yes, I did. But why? He asked, eyes wide. You were just helping. Delilah smiled, though it took all her strength. Sometimes, he said softly, doing the right thing costs more than people think, but I'd rather lose a job than lose my heart. Isaiah looked confused, but Nia wrapped her arms around Delilah's neck. I don't want you to go, she whispered. Delilah hugged her tight. I'm not going anywhere. She had no job, no income, no support, but she would not abandon them over the next few weeks. Delilah began working any job she could find. She cleaned basements for neighbors, shoveled snow for pennies, sorted newspapers at a junkyard. Once, she stood for 10 hours in a grocery store handing out samples of frozen waffles, wearing a paper hat and a name tag that read "Smiles are free." Every night, no matter how tired, she came back to the alley with food, with socks, with stories, with lullabies, and as the children slept, she whispered promises to the sky. I'll keep you warm. I'll keep you fed. I don't care if the whole world turns against me. You're not alone anymore. But the world was relentless. One afternoon, Delilah entered the community aid center, hoping to apply for emergency assistance. The woman at the desk gave her a look that made her stomach twist. You're the girl from the Spoon, aren't you? Delilah swallowed. Yes, I.S. The woman slid her form back without a word. We can't help people with pending accusations. Delilah blinked. What accusation? Petty theft, the woman said coldly. It's been flagged. Manager submitted a report to city services, said you were caught with unauthorized food. Sorry. Delilah left the office shaking. She sat on a bench outside for a long time, watching the snow fall on her knees. She had been accused of theft, not by the law, but by a man with influence. And it was enough to ruin everything, enough to block her from aid, from work, from help. That night, when she returned to the alley, only Isaiah was there. Nia's sick, he said. She's coughing. Real bad. Delilah felt panic rise in her chest. Where is she? Isaiah led her to the back of an old garage where they had made a shelter with cardboard and a top inside. Nia lay curled in a ball, her face flushed, her breathing shallow. Delilah didn't hesitate. She picked Nia up in her arms, wrapped her in her coat, and started walking through snow, through wind, through bitter silence. To the emergency clinic on Maple Avenue. The nurse at the desk raised an eyebrow. Are you her guardian? No, Delilah said. But I'm the only one she has. The nurse hesitated, then called for a doctor. Nia was taken in. Delilah waited in a cold chair all night, shivering, eyes red, hands clasped at dawn. The doctor came out. She's dehydrated. Minor pneumonia, but she'll recover. She needs rest and warmth. Delilah breathed for the first time in hours. As the sun rose, she walked back to the alley with Isaiah at her side. Nia was safe, resting in the overnight shelter they had been given temporarily. Isaiah clutched her hand. "You're like a mom," he said. Delilah looked down, her eyes soft and full. "No, baby," she said. "I'm just someone who saw you. Someone who refused to look away." Isaiah nodded. And in that moment, something changed in her. In him, the wind still howled. The streets were still cold. But in that small moment, in that one broken alley, hope lived, and it was wearing a waitress's coat. The snow that winter didn't melt, it simply hardened, day after day, into icy layers that coated the streets like armor. In Southbridge, people had begun to complain about their pipes freezing, the salt trucks being late, and the bitter wind that burned through coats and gloves. But for Delilah Carter, none of that mattered. She was too busy surviving. She no longer cared about the whispers that followed her at the corner store or the way neighbors turned away when she passed. Her mind was occupied by medicine schedules, soup portions, blanket patches, and most of all Isaiah and Nia. They were no longer just two faces hiding behind a dumpster. They had become her purpose, her family. Delilah had found them. Shelter in the abandoned community greenhouse, a glass dome behind an old park that the city had forgotten. Most of the glass panels were cracked, and the wind still snuck in, but it was better than the alley. She dragged and discarded crates for beds, borrowed a worn-out rug from her neighbor's trash pile, and sealed the broken panes with plastic bags and duct tape. Every night, she brought them warm food from her own small stove, rice and beans, boiled potatoes, sometimes a piece of chicken or a half sandwich she'd saved. She read Isaiah bedtime stories by flashlight, her voice hoarse after long days working odd jobs. And every night before she left, she kissed Nia's forehead and whispered, "Tomorrow will be better, I promise." She didn't always believe it herself, but she never stopped saying it. Then one morning, it all collapsed. Delilah arrived at the greenhouse and found it empty. No Isaiah. No Nia. No footprints. Just a broken crate and the small stuffed cat Nia used to sleep with, lying abandoned. On the floor, Delilah's heart slammed against her ribs. She called out, "Isa, Nia babies." But only the wind answered. She ran through the park, checked the alley, the shelter, the church steps. She knocked on doors of strangers, cried to passers-by. Hours passed, until finally, a tall man in a city worker's vest approached her outside the bus station. "You looking for two kids?" he asked. "Black boy and girl, real skinny. We found them sleeping behind the Salvation building yesterday." Delilah's eyes widened. Yes, that's them. Where are they?" "They're with Child Protective Services now," he said, frowning. "Probably in the temporary center across town." Delilah didn't thank him. She was already running the Southbridge Family Holding Center. The receptionist looked up lazily when Delilah arrived. "Ma'am, we don't allow walk-ins. I just want to know if they're safe," Delilah begged. "Isaiah and Nia, two little kids, orphans, please." The woman scanned a clipboard, then said, "We don't give out placement information unless you're blood-related or a case." Worker Delilah clutched the counter. "They're like my children," she said. "I took care of them for months. I fed them. I bathed them. I saved the little girl's life." "I'm sorry," the woman said with a shrug. "That's not enough." Delilah didn't leave the building. She sat outside on the concrete steps for hours, hands stuffed in her pockets, teeth clenched against the wind. She waited all day, hoping, praying, until finally, at sunset, a thin man in a brown coat walked out and paused at the door. "Are you Miss Carter?" Delilah stood. "Yes, that's me. I'm Mr. Howell. The kids told me about you. They said you're like their mother." "I am," she said breathlessly. "Are they okay?" He nodded, but his face was heavy. "They're in our temporary unit, but they're going to be separated. We don't have foster families who can take both." "No," Delilah said instantly. "You can't. They only have each other." "I'm sorry," Howell said quietly. "We don't have a choice." Delilah's heart cracked like thin ice under too much weight. "I'll take them," she blurted out. "They can live with me. I'll take care of them legally. You can come check anytime. Please, don't split them up." He paused. "Do you have a job?" "I do small work. I earn enough." "Do you have housing, a room above a laundromat? Do you have family support?" Delilah hesitated. "My grandmother," she said, "but she's in a care home. I don't have anyone else." Howell looked at her with pity. "I believe you're a good woman, Miss Carter, but the system doesn't care about that." He handed her a card. "Maybe if you had a lawyer or a steady job. Come back when your life is stable." Delilah stood there, watching him disappear into the building. "When your life is stable," the words rang in her ears. How was she supposed to make her life stable when the world kept cutting her off at the knees? That night, Delilah lit a candle in her apartment. She placed it by the window, hoping somehow the children might see it from wherever they were. She wrapped the small stuffed cat in a scarf and placed it gently on the table. Then she sat on the floor, pulled out Isaiah's old notebook, and began to write. Not a journal entry, a letter. "Dear Isaiah and Nia, I don't know where you are tonight, but I hope you're warm. I hope they're kind to you. I hope you're together. I miss you. I miss your stories, your laughter, even your silence. I promise I'm not giving up. One day you'll see me again. And when you do, I'll be someone who can finally protect you. Love always, Miss Delilah. That letter became the first of many. Every month, she wrote one. She dated it, folded it neatly, and left it in an old donated book inside the city library's reading room, tucked into pages of Charlotte's Web or Where the Wild Things Are. It was her quiet hope that one day they'd come back, that maybe, just maybe, they'd find the letters. And as the years passed, the streets remained cold. The system remained broken, but Delilah Carter, she kept her promises. She never stopped writing, and somewhere far from Southbridge the children were growing up, never knowing that one woman's love was still waiting for them on paper, in memory, and in the deepest part of her heart. In the years that followed the children's disappearance, the city of Southbridge changed, but Delilah Carter's world remained frozen in the same bitter season. Long after the snow had melted, the diner was gone. The sushi restaurant now stood in its place, with big glass windows and sleek white booths. But every time Delilah walked past that street, her footsteps slowed. She could still see her younger self scrubbing the floor under the old brass counter, humming lullabies to herself, pockets stuffed with small change and hope. Now, she walked with her chin down and her bag held tightly to her chest. She moved from job to job and noticed, uncelebrated but never absent. She folded clothes at discount stores. She stocked shelves at night in chain supermarkets. She cleaned motel rooms where no one tipped and everyone complained. And in each job, she kept her head low and her hands moving. It was the only way to survive. The city never forgot the lie. Delilah Carter stole from her employer, even though there were no charges, even though she had paid for every bite of food, even though she had risked her job, her reputation, her safety for children. Truth didn't matter, reputation did, and hers had been buried under someone else's arrogance. Delilah tried not to let the bitterness grow roots in her soul, but it was hard. So hard she lived in a one-room apartment that smelled like bleach and leaking gas. The ceiling had water stains and the floor groaned every time she crossed it. Her heater broke every other week, and she warmed her feet by wrapping them in plastic grocery bags before sliding into socks. There were nights she cried quietly on the edge of her bed, hands pressed to her face, whispering prayers to no one in particular. Please, give me strength, just enough for one more day. And somehow, every morning, she found it. The only light in her world came in the form of letters. She never stopped writing them. Every month for years they filled 6 notebooks, each entry carefully dated, addressed to Isaiah and Nia, even though she had no idea where they were anymore. Were they even in the same state? Were they okay? Did they still remember her? She didn't know. But hope has a strange kind of stubbornness. Each letter was left tucked inside library books, fiction, fairy tales, books about magic and bravery. Sometimes, Delilah would pause and imagine a grown-up Isaiah pulling one from a dusty shelf, eyes widening as he recognized her handwriting. That thought kept her breathing. Meanwhile, her grandmother Pearl's condition worsened. The care home called one night. She's failing. Miss Carter, you should come. Delilah left her shift at the motel and rushed across town. She arrived at the hospice center panting, tears already forming. Pearl lay small and silent beneath a wool blanket, her eyes open but distant. Delilah took her hand. It's me, Grandma. Pearl didn't speak at first, but then her fingers twitched, and she gave a weak smile. You're tired, baby. Delilah nodded a little. You're still fighting every day. Pearl's smile faded. They take everything from us, piece by piece, and you still give. I have too, Delilah whispered. No, her grandmother corrected gently. You choose to. That's power. Tears rolled down Delilah's cheeks. Pearl passed 3 days later. Delilah sat beside her for hours, holding her hand long after the warmth had gone. When she finally stood, she left a single note on the nightstand beside her pillow. I'll carry everything you gave me. I'll carry it with both hands. The years marched forward like boots on concrete. Southbridge forgot her, but Delilah kept moving. She stopped buying new clothes. She learned to fix torn seams with a curved needle and thread. She knew which food pantry had the freshest bread and which office buildings let the cleaning staff keep their leftover coffee. And slowly, over time, she became something more than poor. She became invisible. People looked through her, around her. She was the woman mopping floors after the gala, the cleaner who nodded silently when tourists left crumbs in the hallway, the face behind the bucket in the hotel hallway. And still, she wrote. One night, sitting on the edge of her bed with a flickering lamp and cold tea, she wrote, Dear Isaiah and Nia, it's been 6 years now. I don't know where you are, but I still pray for you. The world is cold, but you are my warmest memory. If you ever wonder if someone loved you, I did. I still do. Love, Miss Delilah. That year, on her birthday, she bought herself a cupcake from a discount grocery store. She stuck a candle in the middle, sat on her balcony, and whispered to the stars, I wish they're okay. She didn't wish for money, or comfort, or even redemption. Just that they were safe, and if she never saw them again, that would be enough. But fate has a long memory, and love, even when quiet, echoes louder than hate. 1 city away, A young man sat in a university library reading To Kill a Mockingbird when a piece of paper fell from the spine. The handwriting was familiar. He froze out. Another woman, in a law school study room, flipped open a dusty book on human rights. A letter slipped out. Her hands trembled. Her breath caught in her throat. And across to different campuses. Two siblings found a voice from the past calling them home. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Isaiah Miller, now 20 years old, sat alone in a quiet corner of the Bayside University library, surrounded by musty books and the soft patter of rain against the window panes. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just browsing through the old literature section, trying to escape the stress of midterms and the ache that sometimes returned when he was alone. He pulled down a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, one of his childhood favorites. As he opened it, a folded paper slipped from between the pages and landed on the floor. At first, he assumed it was a note someone had left behind, maybe a bookmark. But when he unfolded it, his breath caught in his throat, his hands trembled. He recognized the handwriting instantly. Slanted, careful, filled with warmth. Delilah. He whispered her name like a ghost, one he hadn't dared speak out loud for years. His eyes scanned the letter. Dear Isaiah and Nia, if you're reading this, it means you found me. I prayed that you would. I've never stopped thinking about you. The world may have forgotten our nights behind the diner, but I never did. You changed me. You gave my life meaning. Wherever you are, I hope you're safe. I love you like my own. Love always. Miss Delilah. Isaiah's heart pounded so loud he thought the librarian might hear it. Memories crashed into him like waves. The steaming bowls of soup, the soft lullabies, the night he watched her give up everything for him and his sister. He closed his eyes, gripping the letter tight. She's real, he whispered. She never forgot. 2 states away, in a dusty corner of the University of Cal Ridge Law Library, Nia Miller, now 18, headstrong and brilliant, was researching a case study on wrongful termination. She had always felt drawn to justice, though she never fully understood why. Somewhere deep inside, she carried a wound that had never closed. She pulled down an old book on human rights law and opened it. A small envelope fluttered out, landing softly in her lap. At first, she ignored it, but curiosity tugged at her. She opened it and her world stopped. Dear Nia, you were so small when I found you. Always cold, always brave, but your smile could light up the night. I hope you still smile like that. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you longer, but I never stopped trying. I love you. Miss Delilah. Nia stood up so quickly her chair tipped over. A fellow student looked over in surprise, but Nia didn't notice. She had waited her entire life to feel this again, seen, wanted, loved. She pulled out her phone and called the person she knew would understand. That night, across 2 cities, across miles and silence and the weight of time, Isaiah and Nia spoke again for the first time in years. Their voices trembled. They shared the letters, compared dates, locations. It wasn't luck, Nia said breathlessly. She left those letters for us, like a trail, Isaiah whispered, a trail of love. They spent the next weeks digging deeper. Isaiah returned to the library and searched every old book. In the same section he found 4 more letters. Each one was dated, each one addressed to him or Nia. One letter mentioned the patch blanket, another described a night Delilah had cried in her apartment because she didn't know where they were. Nia contacted the library staff. She begged to see their donation records, who had donated the books, and that's when they found it. A receipt dated 7 years ago, signed in loopy cursive, Delilah Carter, Southbridge Public Library donated 89 children's books. Nia cried when she read it. She waited for us, she whispered. All this time, Isaiah searched public records. They found an old addressable of a laundromat in Southbridge. It was faded now, but still listed. They wrote to the building manager and asked if a woman named Delilah had ever lived there. A week later, they received a short reply. Yes, she used to live here, moved out a few years ago, now lives in a yellow cottage near the edge of town next to the river, keeps to herself, always reading. Isaiah and Nia looked at each other over a video call. A silent decision passed between them. It was time to go home. 2 weeks later, Isaiah, now a medical student, and Nia, nearly graduating law school early, boarded a chartered helicopter provided by Isaiah's volunteer hospital network, which often flew staff to under-resourced areas. When the helicopter approached Southbridge, the pilot looked down at the modest yellow house near the river. Here, Isaiah nodded. Double quotes, yes, right there. Inside that cottage, Delilah Carter, now older, with streaks of silver in her curls and slight tremble in her hands, was reading on her porch. She didn't hear the helicopter at first, but when the sound filled the sky, shaking the air with its thunder, she stood slowly. She walked to the yard. Neighbors peeked from behind fences. The helicopter descended like something out of a dream, dark gray, sleek, humming with energy. When it touched down in the open field beside her house, Delilah didn't move. The door opened. Out stepped a tall young man in a suit and overcoat. His eyes glistened. Beside him, a graceful young woman in a navy dress stepped out, clutching something to her chest. A letter. Delilah gasped. Her hand rose to her mouth. They walked forward. step by step toward the woman who had once saved their lives. The wind tugged at their coats. No one spoke. Delilah's eyes brimmed with tears, and then Isaiah whispered, "Do you remember us?" Delilah didn't answer. She couldn't. She just dropped to her knees as tears spilled down her face. Arms outstretched. And the two children she had once fed behind a diner rushed into her embrace. The hug lasted a lifetime. Delilah held them both, grown, tall, radiant, and yet still somehow her little Isaiah near. Her heart pounded like a drum as her arms wrapped around them. Their coats were warm and soft, their hands no longer small, but they smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh linen like the soup kitchen she used to serve them from. Isaiah's voice cracked as he whispered into her ear, "You kept your promise. You never stopped looking." Delilah couldn't speak. Her tears answered for her. It was as if the years folded in on themselves, and that frozen night behind the diner returned. But instead of two shivering children, there now stood a young man with shoulders broad like a tree and a woman with eyes full of fire and grace. After the embrace, they went inside. Delilah's yellow cottage was small and neat, with chipped tiles in the kitchen, curtains she had sewn herself, and dozens of books stacked in quiet corners. A framed photo of her grandmother sat beside a lamp. A cracked teapot steamed on the stove. They sat around the kitchen table just like they used to, except now Isaiah wore a tie, and Nia carried a leather briefcase. "I don't understand," Delilah said at last, wiping her eyes. How did you find me?" Nia smiled and placed the letter on the table. Delilah leaned forward. Her eyes widened. She recognized her own handwriting instantly. "Oh my God, .. she whispered. Isaiah pulled a small stack from his bag. "We found all of them, letter after letter, folded, preserved, read over and over again." Delilah touched them with shaking fingers. "You read them, every word," Nia said. "We never forgot you," Isaiah added. "Even when they split us up. Even when we were adopted by different families. Even when we were too young to remember your name, we remembered your kindness." Delilah smiled through tears. "I used to worry that I'd made it all up in my head, that you were just a dream." Isaiah reached across the table and took her hand. "You were our only reality." And then they told her everything. About the years in foster care, how they were separated but found their way back to each other through a youth leadership summit years later. How Isaiah had been adopted by a nurse and a teacher in upstate New York, who encouraged his love for science. How he had become the top student in his medical school, inspired by Delilah's unwavering care. "I remember you singing lullabies when I couldn't sleep," he said. "Now I sing them to the kids at the children's hospital during overnight shifts." Nia shared her journey, fostered by a civil rights lawyer who taught her the power of words. How she had earned scholarships, won debate championships, and now fought employment discrimination cases in court. "I work for people like you," she said. "People who are silenced, dismissed, people who deserve better." Delilah sat stunned, her hand over her heart. "God," she whispered, "you two turned out more than I ever dared dream." Isaiah grinned. "We had a good start. One warm blanket, 2 stolen sandwiches, and a black waitress who risked everything." Nia leaned forward, her eyes shining. "Miss Delilah, there's more." Isaiah nodded. "We didn't come just to say thank you. We came to change your life." Delilah blinked. "What do you mean?" Nia opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "We've started a foundation. It's called the Carter Light Foundation," Isaiah said. Delilah froze. You named it after me." "We wanted to name it after the woman who lit the first candle," Nia said softly. "You fed us, sheltered us, and gave us dignity when the world gave us nothing." Delilah's hand covered her mouth. "We fund youth shelters, legal clinics, medical aid for the homeless. We're opening one in every city we lived in," Isaiah added. "And now, we want to open one right here in Sandbridge." Nia slid a document across the table. "This is the deed. We already purchased the old community greenhouse, the same one you made into a home for us. We're renovating it. It'll be the first Carter Light Center, with a garden, a kitchen, a free clinic, and your name at the entrance." Delilah didn't breathe for a long time. When she did, it came out in a trembling whisper. "I have nothing to give you in return." Isaiah shook his head. "No, you already gave us everything." The following week, the town buzzed with a mystery. A black helicopter had landed. 2 people in designer suits were seen entering a modest yellow home, and now construction crews were at work reviving the abandoned greenhouse across from the park. They put up a sign that said, "Future home of the Carter Light Center, a place of healing, hope, and honor." Local news reporters asked questions. Delilah didn't answer them, but she did visit the site every day. She walked the same cracked sidewalk, where Isaiah used to stand barefoot in the snow. She remembered Nia's cough, the tiny stuffed cat she left behind, the way she whispered Miss Delilah in her sleep. Now there were bricks. Gardens. Plans for free meals, art programs, and reading rooms. That night, Delilah wrote in her notebook, for the first time in a long time, "Dear Isaiah and Nia, you found your wings. You became a sky I never imagined, and somehow, you flew right back to me. I'm not alone anymore, and I know now I never was. Love always, Miss Delilah." The morning sun poured golden light over Bridge, spilling through the windows of Delilah's small kitchen as she brewed tea. In her chipped kettle, the same one she used when she lived above the laundromat, the scent of jasmine filled the air, and for the first time in years, the silence in her home wasn't heavy or hollow, it was peaceful, comfortable. Across from her sat Isaiah and Nia, still in their travel clothes, laughing softly over stories, from their youth, bits they remembered, and bits they didn't, like mismatched puzzle pieces slowly falling into place. Nia reached out, holding a crumpled drawing between her fingers. "Do you remember this?" she asked Delilah. Delilah leaned in. Her breath caught. It was Isaiah's old notebook, the one he used to scribble in behind the diner. Torn pages, faded pencil marks. In the center was a stick-figure woman with curly hair and a blue apron standing next to two tiny children. Above their heads was a crooked drawing of a helicopter. "You kept this?" Delilah asked, stunned. Isaiah nodded, smiling. "It was the only thing I took with me when they separated us. They wouldn't let me pack much, but I stuffed it into my sock when they weren't looking." Delilah traced the old pencil lines with her fingertip. "You said someday you'd fly in a helicopter." "I thought it was just a boy's dream," Isaiah laughed. "I never stopped dreaming it." "And you came back in one," Delilah whispered. Nia leaned forward. "Miss Delilah, do you know what today is?" Delilah blinked. "What? 18 years ago today was the night you first gave us soup behind the diner." Silence filled the room like breath. Isaiah nodded. "You saved our lives that night. We were going to sleep in that alley and never wake up." Delilah looked down at her tea. Her fingers trembled slightly around the mug. "I remember how small you both were," she said, voice shaking. "Isaiah, you wouldn't even make eye contact, and Nia, you couldn't stop coughing." Nia smiled, her eyes full. "I still remember the taste of that soup, chicken and carrots. It was the first time in months I'd eaten something hot." Delilah wiped away a tear. "Every time I cooked stew after that, I made an extra bowl. Even after they took you, I couldn't stop." Later that day, the three of them drove to the far edge of Southbridge, where the Carter Light Foundation's first location, the renovated greenhouse, was nearly finished. It looked nothing like the place Delilah once found abandoned and covered in vines. Now it had tall glass panels, bright murals, and a wide wooden sign that read, "The Carter Light Center, because every child deserves to be seen." Inside, construction workers put finishing touches on a cozy reading room, a small clinic station, a community kitchen, and a dormitory wing with beds, quilts, and shelves full of donated books. Delilah stood in the center of the atrium, speechless. Isaiah walked beside her, voice quiet. "There'll be free meals here, after-school tutoring, a health nurse on staff, legal aid for struggling families, and art therapy for the kids." Nia added, "We even made space for your letters. The originals framed so kids can read them, and maybe write some of their own." Delilah turned slowly, tears falling silently as she took it all in. "This place," she whispered, "it's so full of light." Isaiah grinned. "So were you." That night, they attended the official inauguration gala for the Carter Light Foundation. Held in the town hall, a place Delilah had once passed with her head down, too ashamed to step inside. But now, she walked in with Isaiah and Nia on either side of her. The three of them arm in arm. People stood. The crowd applauded. Flashbulbs lit the room. Cameras clicked. And for the first time in her life, Delilah Carter was the guest of honor. When it was her turn to speak, she stood behind the podium, holding a small index card in her hands. But then, she looked at Isaiah and Nia sitting in the front row, and she set the card down. She didn't need a speech, just her truth. "I never thought I'd live to see a room like this," she began, "much less stand in front of it. When I was 27, I was a waitress working behind a diner no one remembered. And one night I found two children outside in the cold, alone, scared, starving, and all I did was give them soup. But that soup cost me my job, my reputation, my peace. People called me a thief, a liar, someone not to trust, but I kept showing up. I didn't have much, but I had love, and I had the belief that kindness, even the small kind, matters." She paused, her voice cracking. "And 18 years later, I stand before you with proof. These two beautiful souls beside me, Isaiah and Nia, are my proof." The room went silent. Every heart thudded with emotion. Tears glistened in eyes across the crowd. Delilah smiled through her own. "I wrote letters in the dark, not knowing if anyone would ever find them. But they did, because love leaves trails, even when life tries to cover them up." She looked directly at the camera. "If you're watching this, and you're tired, if you've been called names, if the world's told you to stop caring, don't. Keep showing up, keep giving love, because you never know how far it will go. You might just save someone's life." The room exploded in applause. Isaiah and Nia stood, rushing to her side. Together they bowed, not as a former waitress and two orphans, but as a family that had defied everything that night. As they flew back over Southbridge in the same helicopter, Delilah looked out the window. Below her, the river reflected the stars, and for the first time in a long, long time, she felt free, she felt whole, she felt the sky full of memory and knew she had finally come home. The morning sun poured golden light over Bridge, spilling through the windows of Delilah's small kitchen as she brewed tea. In her chipped kettle, the same one she used when she lived above the laundromat. The scent of jasmine filled the air, and for the first time in years, the silence in her home wasn't heavy or hollow. It was peaceful, comfortable. Across from her sat Isaiah and Nia, still in their travel clothes, laughing softly over stories from their youth, bits they remembered and bits they didn't, like mismatched puzzle pieces slowly falling into place. Nia reached out, holding a crumpled drawing between her fingers. "Do you remember this?" she asked Delilah. Delilah leaned in. Her breath caught. It was Isaiah's old notebook, the one he used to scribble in behind the diner. Torn pages, faded pencil marks. In the center was a stick-figure woman with curly hair and a blue apron standing next to two tiny children. Above their heads was a crooked drawing of a helicopter. "You kept this?" Delilah asked, stunned. Isaiah nodded, smiling. "It was the only thing I took with me when they separated us. They wouldn't let me pack much, but I stuffed it into my sock when they weren't looking." Delilah traced the old pencil lines with her fingertip. "You said someday you'd fly in a helicopter. I thought it was just a boy's dream." Isaiah laughed. "I never stopped dreaming it." "And you came back in one," Delilah whispered. Nia leaned forward. "Miss Delilah, do you know what today is?" Delilah blinked. "What? 18 years ago today was the night you first gave us soup behind the diner." Silence filled the room like breath. Isaiah nodded. "You saved our lives that night. We were going to sleep in that alley and never wake up." Delilah looked down at her tea. Her fingers trembled slightly around the mug. "I remember how small you both were," she said, voice shaking. "Isaiah, you wouldn't even make eye contact, and Nia, you couldn't stop coughing." Nia smiled, her eyes full. "I still remember the taste of that soup, chicken and carrots. It was the first time in months I'd eaten something hot." Delilah wiped away a tear. "Every time I cooked stew after that, I made an extra bowl. Even after they took you, I couldn't stop." Later that day, the three of them drove to the far edge of Southbridge, where the Carter Light Foundation's first location, the renovated greenhouse, was nearly finished. It looked nothing like the place Delilah once found abandoned and covered in vines. Now it had tall glass panels, bright murals, and a wide wooden sign that read, "The Carter Light Center, because every child deserves to be seen." Inside, construction workers put finishing touches on a cozy reading room, a small clinic station, a community kitchen, and a dormitory wing with beds, quilts, and shelves full of donated books. Delilah stood in the center of the atrium, speechless. Isaiah walked beside her, voice quiet. "There'll be free meals here, after-school tutoring, a health nurse on staff, legal aid for struggling families, and art therapy for the kids." Nia added, "We even made space for your letters. The originals framed so kids can read them, and maybe write some of their own." Delilah turned slowly, tears falling silently as she took it all in. "This place," she whispered, "it's so full of light." Isaiah grinned. "So were you." That night, they attended the official inauguration gala for the Carter Light Foundation. Held in the town hall, a place Delilah had once passed with her head down, too ashamed to step inside. But now, she walked in with Isaiah and Nia on either side of her. The three of them arm in arm. People stood. The crowd applauded. Flashbulbs lit the room. Cameras clicked. And for the first time in her life, Delilah Carter was the guest of honor. When it was her turn to speak, she stood behind the podium, holding a small index card in her hands. But then, she looked at Isaiah and Nia sitting in the front row, and she set the card down. She didn't need a speech, just her truth. "I never thought I'd live to see a room like this," she began, "much less stand in front of it. When I was 27, I was a waitress working behind a diner no one remembered. And one night I found two children outside in the cold, alone, scared, starving, and all I did was give them soup. But that soup cost me my job, my reputation, my peace. People called me a thief, a liar, someone not to trust, but I kept showing up. I didn't have much, but I had love, and I had the belief that kindness, even the small kind, matters." She paused, her voice cracking. "And 18 years later, I stand before you with proof. These two beautiful souls beside me, Isaiah and Nia, are my proof." The room went silent. Every heart thudded with emotion. Tears glistened in eyes across the crowd. Delilah smiled through her own. "I wrote letters in the dark, not knowing if anyone would ever find them. But they did, because love leaves trails, even when life tries to cover them up." She looked directly at the camera. "If you're watching this, and you're tired, if you've been called names, if the world's told you to stop caring, don't. Keep showing up, keep giving love, because you never know how far it will go. You might just save someone's life." The room exploded in applause. Isaiah and Nia stood, rushing to her side. Together they bowed, not as a former waitress and two orphans, but as a family that had defied everything that night. As they flew back over Southbridge in the same helicopter, Delilah looked out the window. Below her, the river reflected the stars, and for the first time in a long, long time, she felt free. She felt whole. She felt the sky full of memory and knew she had finally come home. The day the Carter Light Foundation opened its national headquarters, The entire town of Southbridge turned into a celebration. Not because of the money. Not because of the headlines, but because a forgotten woman in a yellow house had done what no government, no politician, no celebrity could. She changed lives quietly. One bowl of soup. One warm blanket. One loving lullaby at a time. The ribbon cutting was set for a Saturday morning, and by dawn a line stretched around the newly renovated district building. An old brick courthouse transformed into a place of healing. The words Carter Light National Center for Compassion and Care were etched into its foundation stone. Delilah arrived last. Not by accident. She wanted everyone else to be seen first, just as she had once wanted for Isaiah and Nia. But when she finally stepped out of the black SUV, the crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, even tears, and then gasps, because behind her stepped two young men in uniform. Not just any uniform, us Marines, then a teacher, then a nurse, then a woman in a wheelchair who once slept under the bridge behind the old diner. One by one, people whom Delilah had helped even unknowingly appeared beside her, forming a line. They had flown in from 5 different states. She had no idea. Isaiah took the microphone. He looked at the crowd, then at his former guardian. Now, the reason hundreds of children had safe places to sleep, my sister and I, he began, were just 2 kids who slipped through the cracks. But Miss Delilah, she didn't just patch those cracks, she built a bridge. A bridge made of kindness, patience, and faith. The audience quieted. Isaiah pointed to the building behind him. This isn't just a foundation. It's not just a center. It's a home for anyone who ever felt unseen, unheard, unloved. He turned to Delilah. And this time, you don't now have to stand in the back. This time you're leading the way. As the ribbon fell and cheers rose into the sky, something incredible happened. From above, 5 helicopters passed over the town. Not military, not flashy. Just 5 white aircraft flying in a V formation. Each one was sponsored by a different foundation in her name. From the ground, the crowd looked up, some with hands over their hearts, some openly crying. A child whispered to his mother, "It looks like they're saluting her." And maybe they were, because sometimes, when the world has been dark too long, the sky breaks open, not in a storm, but in reverence. That evening, as dusk fell over her house, Delilah sat on the roof of her yellow house, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Nia climbed up and joined her, a thermos of cocoa in hand. "You know," Nia said softly, "I used to dream that I'd come back to find you. I used to dream," Delilah whispered back, "that you were alive and warm somewhere. That was enough for me." They sat in silence for a long while, sipping cocoa and watching the stars emerge. Below them, the Carter Light building glowed, gently like a lighthouse. Inside the house, Isaiah finished putting the last frame on the wall. A photo of 3 people taken earlier that day, Delilah in the middle, arms around the 2 children she once saved. Underneath the photo was a brass plate that read, "Family, not by blood, but by heart." 3 days later, Delilah received another letter, this one from the White House. The president was requesting to meet her personally and present her with the Presidential Citizen's Medal. Delilah smiled faintly as she read it aloud. Then she looked out the window and whispered, "I was never trying to be special. I was just trying to be kind." 1 year later, the Carter Light Foundation had centers in 6 cities, each one built near the poorest districts, each one run by volunteers who knew what pain felt like and knew how to heal it. At the opening of the 6th center, a young girl stood up during story hour and asked, "Who's Miss Delilah?" Isaiah knelt beside her and smiled. "She's the reason you're not cold tonight." The girl hugged the blanket around her shoulders and whispered, "I want to be like her someday." A soft rain drizzled across Southbridge that morning, whispering gently on rooftops and leaves. It was the kind of rain that made people stay in bed a little longer, sip tea a little slower, and remember things they hadn't thought of in years. Inside the yellow house, the world felt still. Delilah sat at her sewing machine by the window, humming an old hymn as she patched a quilt. It was one of many she'd made recently, most from donated fabric, torn uniforms, or gently used children's clothes dropped off by volunteers. But this one was different. It wasn't for a shelter, or for an orphan. This one had a name stitched right into it: Isaiah and Nia, my forever children. The Carter Light Foundation was now a nationwide movement, with centers open in 12 cities and funding pouring in from across the world. It had become more than just a social program. There was a revolution of compassion, and yet, the heart of it all still pulsed quietly within that modest yellow house. Journalists kept calling, authors wanted book deals, streaming platforms offered documentaries. Delilah said no to most of them. "I didn't do this for lights or likes," he said. "I did it because love doesn't wait to be famous, it just shows up." One rainy afternoon, a stranger arrived. A girl barely 18 stood outside her porch with a plastic bag, soaked through. She wore torn jeans, no coat, and her eyes looked too tired for her age. Delilah opened the door gently. "Honey," she said softly, "come on inside." The girl hesitated. "I don't want help." Delilah nodded. "That's all right, I just made soup." The girl's lip trembled. "Soup, chicken and carrots." Delilah smiled, just like the first time. The girl stepped in. And suddenly, Delilah was 27 again, standing behind the diner with 2 shivering kids under her apron. Time folded. And history like love repeated itself after the girl fell asleep on the couch wrapped in one of Delilah's handmade quilts. Isaiah arrived. He was now a pediatric surgeon, fresh from a conference in Chicago. He smelled of antiseptic and mint tea. "You took in another one," he said, smiling. Delilah chuckled. "I didn't take her in. I just gave her soup." Isaiah looked over at the girl, peaceful for the first time in who knows how long. "No, they call you the blanket lady online," he said. Delilah raised an eyebrow. "Do they?" "Yep. One of the shelters in Oregon posted about how your quilts helped 5 runaway teens get through their first winter. Now they all sleep under your work." "I just stitch fabric." Delilah shrugged. Isaiah smiled. "No, you stitch lives back together." That week something extraordinary happened. A well-known museum in Washington, D.C. reached out. They wanted to exhibit one of Delilah's original quilts in a national gallery for black women in history. It would be displayed beside artifacts from Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, and Maya Angelou. Delilah laughed when she read the email. "I'm just a waitress." Naya, who had flown in for the weekend, smiled softly. "No, you're the reason we're not still waiting tables ourselves." Months passed. The girl on the couch, her name was Jasmine, got a job at the local bakery. She started attending classes at the community college. Delilah let her stay in the spare bedroom and taught her how to sew. "I'm not good at anything," Jasmine once said. Delilah handed her a needle and thread. "Everyone is good at something. Some of us are just quietly gifted." By winter, Jasmine had made 5 quilts of her own. One of them, a bright blue one with gold stars, was wrapped around a toddler at a Carter Light shelter in New Orleans. The blanket had a tag stitched in the corner made with love from someone who knows, and so it grew, not just the foundation, but the ripple. From Delilah to Isaiah and Nia, from them to Jasmine, from Jasmine to a child, and from that child who knows. Years later, a journalist asked Delilah, "What do you think your legacy will be?" She sat in her rocking chair, wrapped in one of her older quilts. She thought for a long time, then said, "I used to think I didn't have one, but now I think my legacy is thread. You can't always see it, but it holds everything together." Years later, when history books would mention her name, they wouldn't begin with the awards or the helicopters. They would begin with soup, a steaming bowl of chicken and carrots in a dented silver pot, served by a tired black waitress on a cold night behind a forgotten diner. That's where the miracle began. A decade had passed since Isaiah and Nia returned to Delilah's life, since Jasmine found refuge on her porch, and since the first Carter Light Center opened its doors. Now there were 42 across the country. A Carter Light van pulled into underserved neighborhoods every morning with hot food, blankets, books, and someone who cared enough to knock. And on the side of every van, painted in soft gold letters, were the words, "Sometimes, soup is enough to save a life." Delilah never took credit. She still lived in the yellow house, still made soup every Sunday, still answered the door in slippers and offered cocoa to anyone who looked lost. But the world had changed around her because she never changed one winter. Evening, a letter came, this one from Geneva, Switzerland. It was from the United Nations Humanitarian Council. They were awarding Delilah the World's Compassion Medal, the highest civilian honor for global humanitarian impact. A delegate had visited 3 Carter Light centers in different countries, Brazil and Nepal, and all of them credited their programs to her original blueprint of love, food, warmth, safety, and listening. Delilah sat in her kitchen holding the letter in her lap, staring at the chipped tile beneath her feet. "I didn't mean to build anything," she whispered to herself. "I just couldn't let 2 children go hungry." On the day of the award ceremony, Delilah wore the same navy dress again. She didn't want stylists. She didn't want media prep. She didn't even want a speech. "I'm not here to impress," she said. "I'm just here because love is loudest when it's quiet." The hall was filled with dignitaries, presidents, scholars, humanitarians from around the globe. But when Delilah stepped onto that stage, everyone stood not because of who she was, but because of what she meant. The host asked her to share just one message with the world. Delilah paused, then leaned into the microphone and said, simply, "We keep trying to fix the world with power, but maybe the world needs more soup. Something warm, something simple, something that says, you're safe now. I didn't end war. I didn't make laws, but I fed 2 children, and they changed the world. So feed someone, and let love do the rest." The entire auditorium fell silent, and then tears, applause, and hope back home. A national news network aired a documentary titled "The Soup That Changed a Nation," the Delilah Carter story. Millions watched it, but the part that reached the most hearts wasn't the awards or the numbers. It was the old footage from a hidden security camera behind the diner, grainy black and white video in it. A younger Delilah knelt beside 2 shivering kids, opened a small thermos, and handed them each a bowl. There was no music, no narration, just the sound of spoons clinking against bowls, and the soft hum of a lullaby in classrooms across America. Children were assigned essays on her and art programs. Students painted murals of soup bowls and patchwork quilts in churches, mosques, and temples, sermons were given about the gospel of the soup lady. And every December 5th, now officially named National Compassion Day, families across the country made soup together and delivered it to shelters and neighbors. Delilah never saw herself as famous, but she saw the impact. She saw a homeless child wearing one of Jasmine's quilts. She saw a retired teacher volunteering at a Carter Light Center. She saw Isaiah on television, saving lives in pediatric war zones. She saw Naya founding schools in rural communities, and she saw ordinary people choosing kindness because of one small act years ago. On the final page of her journal, Delilah wrote, "Kindness doesn't need cameras, it doesn't need applause, it just needs a heart, and soup, always soup." She passed away peacefully the next spring, in her yellow house, with a blanket across her knees and sunlight on her face. In her honor, every Carter Light Center around the world served free soup that day, and children, many of them orphans, stood in line not just for food, but to belong.